Welcome to Occult Mysticism, your guide to magical wisdom. Today we explore the Tree of Life, a study in magic by Israel Regardie, a deep dive into the Kabbalistic Tree of Life and its magical applications. Join us as we unravel its secrets. Subscribe for more esoteric journeys. An appreciation of the author and his monumental work. It is with a profound sense of reverence and intellectual duty that we approach the task of summarizing one of the most significant testaments of the Western esoteric tradition penned in the 20th century, The Tree of Life, a study in magic, by the erudite and sincere scholar Israel Regardie. In an era when the royal art of magic was grievously misunderstood, relegated to the shadows of superstition by the profane, and willfully obscured by those who should have been its champions, Mr. Regardie undertook the Herculean labor of presenting its sublime principles in a manner both lucid and systematic. He sought not to dazzle with inscrutable jargon, nor to guard secrets out of a misplaced sense of elitism, but rather to illuminate a path for the earnest student, to provide a veritable guidebook through the intricate and often bewildering landscapes of mystical philosophy and theurgic practice. Throughout this magnificent work, one feels the author's deep and abiding respect for the ancient traditions from which he draws. He pays homage not only to the fundamental structure of the Holy Qabalah, which forms the very backbone of his exposition, but also to the great minds who have trod this path before him. He approaches the controversial yet brilliant figure of Aleister Crowley, whom he served for a time as a secretary, with a balanced and discerning eye, acknowledging his genius and profound contributions while not shying away from his complexities. He similarly gives credit to the pioneers of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, whose intricate system of initiation and magical training he sought to preserve and clarify for future generations. Mr. Regardie's great gift was one of synthesis. Drawing upon his extensive study of yoga, alchemy, the Qabalah, and the scattered fragments of the mystery traditions, he forged a coherent and practical system. He demonstrated, with compelling clarity, that magic is not a relic of a barbarous past, but a living, breathing science of the soul, a precise and potent methodology for the expansion of consciousness and the attainment of union with the divine. He insisted that the path of the magician, or the theurgist, is a noble one, demanding discipline, intelligence, and above all, an unquenchable aspiration for the light of truth. This book, The Tree of Life, stands as a testament to his singular vision. It was, as he himself notes, the first true emergence of his burgeoning spirit, a work that consolidated vast and fragmented knowledge into a comprehensible whole. It has since become a foundational text for countless students, a key that has unlocked the gates of the sanctuary for those who might otherwise have wandered lost in the labyrinth of occult literature. In summarizing this work, we endeavor to honor the author's original intent to present the high and holy science of magic in its true light as a noble philosophy and a practical system for reaching those sun-drenched heights of attainment to which all mankind must ultimately aspire. We shall proceed, therefore, not as critics, but as humble expositors of a truly monumental contribution to the spiritual heritage of the West. The author's preface to his study. In his introductions, both to the original and to the later second edition, the author, Israel Regardie, sets the stage for his magnum opus with a candor and sincerity that is at once refreshing and deeply instructive. He reveals his personal motivations and the intellectual climate in which the Tree of Life was born. He speaks of the work with a warmth and affection, as a parent might speak of a favorite child, for it was the first true book to emerge from his own spiritual core. He distinguishes it from his prior publication, A Garden of Pomegranates, which he humbly describes as an expansion of personal Kabbalistic notes, whereas The Tree of Life represents a far more comprehensive and synthesized effort. The author's primary aim, as he states with unwavering clarity, was to fill a glaring void in the literature of the occult. He observed with dismay the widespread ignorance and gross misunderstanding surrounding the very nature of divine theurgy. For centuries, the noble art of magic had been sullied, its reputation mangled and left to the depredations of charlatans and the ill-informed, until the very word magic became synonymous with all that was odious and base. Even with the efforts of pioneers like Eliphaz Levi and the advent of the Theosophical movement, which brought occult matters into open discussion, Mr. Regardie found that no single work existed that provided a lucid, unambiguous, and exact exegesis of the subject, one unhampered by excessive symbolism and opaque language. It was to remedy this deficiency that The Tree of Life was published. Mr. Regardie's stated objective was to render the core principles of the towering structure of magic intelligible to the intelligent layman, the student of the mysteries, and those versed in other mystical philosophies. He vehemently rejected the notion that the secrets of the art were entirely incommunicable, insisting that while some aspects of mystical experience transcend language, there is a vast body of knowledge within magic that is definite, precise, and communicable. He sought to demonstrate that magic is an absolutely scientific system, each part thereof capable of verification and demonstrable proof through practical experiment. In his introduction to the second edition, written some 35 years after the first, the author reflects on the work with the wisdom of maturity. He acknowledges the flamboyancy and a tendency to adjectivitis of his youth, but stands by the book's core value as a sincere and simple guide to a profound art. He notes with gratitude the deep and abiding friendships that arose from correspondence about the book from all over the world. He also clarifies the book's relationship to two towering influences in his life, Aleister Crowley and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The book, he states, was dedicated to Crowley, whom he had served as secretary, yet it also represented a symbolic gesture of independence from him. While crediting Crowley as a significant source of inspiration and knowledge, whose material he believed would never die, Regardie's work was his own synthesis. Furthermore, he reveals that the writing of The Tree of Life was not influenced by the Golden Dawn, as his invitation to join a branch of that order came as a result of the book's publication. It was this work that served as a testament to his independent thought, which ironically led one faction of the order to condemn him, while another invited him into their fold. He expresses that this book serves as an excellent guide to the vast and complicated system of the Golden Dawn, providing a bird's-eye view of the entire Western magical tradition. Finally, the author issues a most sober and important caution, one that demonstrates his profound understanding of the psychological implications of the great work. He strongly recommends that the serious student undergo a course of psychotherapeutic treatment before proceeding too far with the practices outlined in the book. This, he sagely advises, will increase self-awareness and help to eliminate bodily and emotional tensions that can be exacerbated by the potent techniques of the magical art. With this prudent counsel, he sends his work forth, a noble philosophy and an archaic yet practical system of attainment, hoping that all who read it may find in its pages the same spiritual aid, comfort, and enlightenment that he found in its writing. The chaos of the modern world and the promise of theurgy. The opening chapter of Mr. Regardie's profound study presents a stark and resonant diagnosis of the modern condition. He paints a picture of a civilization floundering in a morass of its own making, a world where the very fabric of the social order appears to be in a state of disintegration. He observes that the prevailing social system and its set of values are like diseased tentacles, clutching humanity and stifling the individual's divine heritage. It becomes increasingly difficult, he laments, for any person to retain their individuality and exert that which truly makes them human. The root cause of this widespread decay and inner lethargy, our author posits, is a spiritual one. Mankind, particularly in the Western world, has lost its spiritual vision. A self-imposed barrier has been erected, severing humanity from the vital current of life and inspiration that pulses throughout the universe. In its frantic pursuit of a fleeting exterior existence, humanity has neglected its spiritual affairs, forgetting the very source of its nourishment and sustenance. The result of this self-inflicted divorce from the dynamic principle within and without is chaos and the crumbling of all that was once held sacred. Mr. Regardie finds a key to understanding this predicament in the age-old doctrine of ignorance. He references the Buddha's teaching that existence is fraught with suffering, but suggests this was not a doctrine of despair. Rather, it was a goad, a spur to encourage men to transcend the limitations of the personal ego and seek a superior mode of life. The fundamental cause of sorrow, our author insists, is ignorance of one's true nature and purpose. According to the traditional philosophy of the magicians, which Mr. Regardie proceeds to outline, every individual is a unique and autonomous center of consciousness, a star pursuing its own orbit in the vastness of space. Just as stars in the heavens seldom conflict unless one strays from its appointed path, so too would there be harmony among humankind if each individual were grounded in the reality of their own true will and ideal nature. The present discord arises because men have forsaken these celestial essences, straying from the dynamic spiritual sources that inhere within themselves and the universe at large. This ignorance of the soul's true orbit is the ultimate root of all dissatisfaction and unhappiness. How, then, may humanity return to this state of ecstatic identity with its deeper self? Where is the road that leads to the betterment of the individual and the consequent solution to the world's perplexing problems? The answer, our author powerfully argues, lies in mysticism, the technical method of spiritual attainment which has existed since the dawn of intelligent man. He defines mysticism not as a vague sentiment, but as the art and science of achieving a reintegrating contact with reality. Its purpose is to induce that profound spiritual experience which is the hallmark of genius. Mr. Regardie asserts that genius is not merely the result of infinite patience or perspiration, but is caused by or proceeds from a spiritual experience of the highest intuitional order. It is a flash of enlightenment that carries with it an enduring brightness and a fulfillment of the mind and heart's deepest yearnings. He proposes the logical postulate that if such an experience could be induced through a specific form of psychological and spiritual training, humanity as a whole could be exalted, and a mighty new race could arise. This training is the great work, the supreme injunction of which has always been, know thyself. The primary objective of the mystic is not worldly success or artistic fame, though these may follow as byproducts, but self-knowledge in its loftiest transcendental sense. This quest for self-knowledge is the path of mysticism, which Mr. Regardie declares to be the most sacred of all the arts. He then makes a crucial distinction, dividing the technique of mysticism into two major divisions, yoga and magic. He vehemently protests the common error of placing magic in opposition to mysticism as something unspiritual or gross. Instead, he argues compellingly that yoga and magic are two different yet complementary paths to the same ultimate goal. Both are valid branches of the one great tree of mysticism, which is the ecstatic relationship of the self to the universe. Yoga, he explains, seeks to arrive at reality by undermining the ordinary waking consciousness, stilling the modifications of the thinking principle to allow the inner sun of the spirit to shine forth. Its aim is the complete abeyance of thought at will. Magic, on the other hand, is a system that uses ceremonial, symbol, and incantation to deliberately exalt the imagination and the soul, causing it to transcend the normal plane of thought altogether. One method lays the axe to the root of the tree of consciousness from below, the other endeavors to rise entirely above the plane where such trees exist. The end result in both cases is identical: ecstasy and a profound, rapturous union with the divine. The ideal path, he concludes, is a judicious combination of both techniques. Thus, the divine theurgy, or magic, is presented not as a superstition, but as a potent and noble means for the redemption of the individual and, through the individual, the world. The distinction of true magic. Having established magic as a legitimate branch of mysticism, Mr. Regardie devotes a considerable portion of his work to clarifying what the royal art truly is, and, just as importantly, what it is not. He anticipates the criticisms and misunderstandings that have long plagued the subject, particularly from certain circles that would hastily condemn the entire technique as psychism. He expresses a deep-seated frustration with this facile classification and the readiness to apply labels of opprobrium to things not fully understood. It is to correct this view for all time that the Tree of Life was written. The author argues that the condemnation of magic as mere psychism is wholly misplaced and unjustified. He points to the core philosophical tenets shared by many esoteric systems, including theosophy itself, which state that each human being is a spark or a child of a divine, cosmic being. The theurgists of old referred to these lofty intelligences as gods or universal essences. If man is indeed the offspring of these cosmic progenitors, then it is not only natural but necessary that he should aspire to union with them. This union, Mr. Regardie asserts, is the very origin and raison d'être of magic. He sets out to demonstrate that the techniques of magic are in the closest accord with the highest traditions of antiquity, possessing the sanction of such revered figures as Iamblichus, Proclus, and Porphyry. Therefore, to dismiss the art with the single word psychism is utterly absurd. Psychism, he defines, has for its object the stimulation of the lower self, often in ignorance of or at the expense of the higher self. Magic, in stark contrast, is the science of bringing the entirety of one's nature under the dominion of the will. No principle is repressed, rather each is developed to its own perfection as an aspect of the Supreme Spirit. If the theurgist engages in practices like astral traveling, it is not for the idle acquisition of psychic powers. He does so for three principal reasons. First, to perceive in the astral light a reflection of himself, thereby gaining a profound form of self-knowledge. Second, to constantly ascend from the grosser, more sensuous regions of the astral realm to the more fiery and lucid spiritual worlds. Third, he seeks to conquer and master the invisible world in all its aspects, making the denizens of that sphere submit to his royal will, which is symbolized by his magical instruments. The acquisition of any power is never an end in itself. It must instantly be subordinated to the one supreme aspiration, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, the higher self. Any aspiration to a lesser goal constitutes, with but few exceptions, an act of black magic. Another common misconception that the author seeks to dispel is the notion that magic leads to mediumship. While both the magician and the medium may cultivate a state of trance, the nature of that trance is worlds apart. The medium cultivates a passive, negative state which hurls the center of consciousness downward into the chaotic, instinctual realm of the lower self, or what the Kabbalists call the nephesh. This is an abdication of humanity and divinity in favor of animal life and potential obsession. The magician, conversely, is intensely active. He strives to hold the rational mind in abeyance not by descending, but by rising above it, opening himself to the illuminating rays of the higher self. His is a noetic trance, an exaltation of the soul, not a descent into the torpor of the vegetative consciousness. Mr. Regardie also makes a clear and crucial distinction between the divine theurgy he expounds and the popular, debased notions of sorcery. He is not concerned with love charms, philtres, or hexes designed to harm one's neighbor. Such vile and stupid practices rightly deserve the name black magic, and his study has naught to do with them, though he does not deny their potential efficacy. The magic he writes of is a spiritual quest, a task of self-creation and the reintegration of the soul with the eternal. It is for the one who desires to awaken a more noble consciousness and to dedicate his life to a higher purpose. Finally, the author takes care to acknowledge the eclectic sources of his own philosophy. He expresses his deep obligation to the practical Qabalah of the Hebrew sages and the sacerdotal theurgy of the Egyptians. He affirms his great respect for H.P. Blavatsky, whose work provided him with a vast philosophical superstructure, even while maintaining his own eclectic right to choose and reject certain tenets. He acknowledges his debt to other writers such as Arthur Edward Waite, Eliphaz Levi, S. L. McGregor Mathers, and W. Wynne Westcott, viewing their works with a discerning eye, extracting the nuggets of pure gold from the ore of their sometimes obscure or flawed presentations. He adopts the Kabbalistic tree of life as the fundamental framework for his system, not as a complete philosophy in itself, but as a magical alphabet, a synthetic and constructive classification of ideas, numbers, and symbols from which the student, aided by spiritual experience, can construct their own satisfactory edifice of high philosophy. The philosophical foundations of the royal art. In the third chapter of his treatise, Mr. Regardie insists upon a truth well understood by the eminent theurgists of all ages, that a firm grasp of the august philosophy underlying the magical arts is an absolute prerequisite to any successful practical work. To attempt the complex operations of magic without a precise knowledge of the principles involved is to court danger. The efficacy of the sacred rites depends not upon blind faith, but upon an intelligent understanding of the arcane symbols and the spiritual realities they are intended to convey. The author posits that the principal ingredients of the Western magical system are a synthesis of two great traditions, the hieratic religion of the sacerdotal caste of Egypt and the mystical philosophy of the Qabalah. Whether the Qabalah was originally given to Moses or derived from his studies in the temples of the Nile is a point of historical speculation. What is certain, however, is that the practical theurgy of the Egyptians harmonizes remarkably well with the philosophical theories of the Qabalah, forming a sublime and workable system. At the core of this system is the Tree of Life, a simple yet profound mathematical structure of symbols, numbers, and names. Our author echoes the admiration of Eliphaz Levi for this elegant framework, which utilizes 10 archetypal numbers, the Sephiroth, and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet to map the entirety of creation. Mathematics was ever considered a divine science, for number adumbrates the very creative processes of the universe and the development of the human soul. The ancient philosophers taught their disciples to think of cosmic realities in terms of a numerical sequence where each number corresponds to a specific stage of evolution or state of being. The philosophy of the Qabalah, as Mr. Regardie explains, is one of evolution or emanation. It conceives of the universe as flowing forth from a primeval, unmanifest principle. This ultimate reality is named Ein Sof, the infinite. It is described as boundless, unknowable, and unchangeable. Because it surpasses all finite understanding, it is poetically called Ein, or no thing. Its perfect symbol is the infinite circle, representing a state of homogeneity before the worlds came to be. This state of quiescence is broken by the law of periodicity, which governs the eternal rhythm of manifestation and dissolution. The process begins with a contraction of the infinite light, a positing of a single, brilliant point of light within the limitless expanse of space. This first manifestation, this cosmic center, is the first Sephira, named Kether, the crown. It is the first logos, the deepest sense of selfhood that is the substratum of all consciousness and the ultimate root of all substance. From this primordial unity, duality emerges. Two distinct principles, consciousness and its vehicle, substance, flow forth. These are the second and third Sephiroth, Chokmah wisdom, the great cosmic father, and Bina understanding, the great cosmic mother. This first triad of Kether, Chokmah, and Bina are called the supernals. They exist beyond the abyss, that great gulf fixed between the ideal and the actual. From them, a second triad of Sephiroth is projected. These are Chesed, mercy or grace, corresponding to the expansive and orderly power of Jupiter, Qabalah, might or severity, representing the formative, fiery energy of Mars, and Tifereth, beauty, the central, balancing sphere of the Sun, the point of equilibrium and the seat of the soul, or the Sun. This second triad, in turn, reflects itself downward to form a third. This consists of Netzach, victory, the sphere of Venus, representing the cohesive, emotional, and instinctual forces of nature, Hod, splendor, the sphere of Mercury, representing the fluidic, intellectual, and communicative aspects of reality, and Yesod, the foundation, the sphere of the moon, which is the repository of the higher forces and the subtle electromagnetic basis upon which the physical world is built. This entire structure culminates in the 10th and final Sephira, Malkuth, the kingdom. It is the physical world itself, the concrete crystallization of all the higher planes, the dwelling place of the Holy Ghost. Mr. Regardie further explains the concept of the four worlds, which are metaphysical regions of consciousness and matter. These are Atziluth, the archetypal world, Braya, the creative world, Yetzirah, the formative world, and Asiya, the physical world. This structure reinforces the great Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, for everything that exists in the mundane sphere has its ideal counterpart in the higher worlds. The final and most crucial element of this philosophy is the understanding that the universe is not a dead mechanism, but is filled with life, consciousness, and intelligence. Corresponding to each Sephira and each world is a hierarchy of conscious beings, gods, archangels, angels, and spirits, who are the administrators and governors of the cosmos. This is the pivotal center of magical philosophy, a system that is at once a monotheism, in that it recognizes one ultimate life, and a polytheism, in that it recognizes that this life manifests as a host of divine beings. The object of magic, then, is for man, the microcosm, to unite his individual consciousness with the greater being of these universal essences, the gods who are the eternal sources of all light, life, and love, the nature of the astral light. Having laid the philosophical groundwork of the Qabalah, our author next directs our study to a concept of paramount importance in the practical work of magic, the universal plastic mediator known as the astral light. This is the subtle substance of the formative world, or more specifically, the sphere of Yesod, the foundation. Mr. Regardie, following the terminology of the great French magus, Eliphas Levi, describes this medium as an omnipresent and all-permeating fluid of extremely subtle matter, a four-dimensional plane of luminous etheric substance that is at once electric, magnetic, and radioactive in its nature. This ambient and all-penetrating fluid is the great magical agent. It is the repository of all forms, the memory of nature, and the medium for the vibrations of motion. The author draws our attention to Levi's eloquent symbolic descriptions of this force: the girdle of Isis, the double serpent of the Caduceus, the winged dragon of Medea, and the serpent of Genesis. These ancient symbols all point to a single, potent, and dualistic power. The astral light contains the builder's plan, the archetypal model projected from the higher realms upon which the entire external world is constructed. It is both substance and motion, a perpetual spiraling dance of opposite yet complementary forces. Mr. Regardie takes care to compare this magical concept with the scientific ether of his day. While acknowledging similarities, especially with the more abstract conception of the space-time continuum, he emphasizes a crucial difference. The scientific ether is largely a mathematical abstraction or a working hypothesis, whereas the astral light has been and may be verified by direct visional experience through the trained senses of the seer and magician. It exists on a different plane of consciousness, its particles vibrating at a rate imperceptible to our ordinary physical senses. Of greatest importance for the student is the understanding of the dual nature of this light. It is, as Blavatsky stated, bisexual. Its higher, male part is purely divine and spiritual, the very substance of wisdom. Its lower, female portion is intermingled with matter and is the seat of the blind, instinctual forces of the cosmos. This lower aspect, when considered alone, is the veriest cesspool of the universe, a repository for the cast-off psychic remnants and bestial filth of all living creatures. This is the darkly splendid world, of which the Chaldean oracles warn, a faithless depth filled with unintelligible and illusory images. The Egyptian priests knew this realm as the Tuat, a region of decay and terror where the dead wander hopelessly in a land without water or air. Conversely, the higher aspect of this plane, the divine astral, is the soul of the world, a celestial heaven of harmony and light. This is the Amentet of the Egyptians, the blissful island of truth, the abode of the gods. It is with this solar, fiery, and celestial region that the theurgist is concerned. His work is to transcend the lunar, reflective, and automatic currents of the lower astral and to ascend into this realm ever splendid. The astral light, being the immediate vehicle for thought and feeling, is the great arcanum of practical magic. Its control constitutes a major part of the great work. It is the imagination of nature, a plastic substance highly susceptible to the workings of the human imagination, which can impress upon it forms and matrices that the will can then stabilize and energize. Every thought we think and every act we perform leaves an indelible impress upon this medium, which also serves as the memory of nature. It is this astral record which is the true book of consciences that will be opened on the last day. The author explains that the accumulated negative thoughts and passions of mankind contaminate the lower astral, creating a toxic pall of what the Kabbalists call the Qliphoth, or excremental shells. When this malefic force becomes excessive, it precipitates onto the physical plane in the form of cataclysms, plagues, wars, and other disasters. However, just as it is the medium for destruction, so too is it the instrument for the creation of a new and better world. The theurgist, by his own spiritual attainment and his work of purification, helps to transmute these base elements, thereby serving as an unseen herald of a new eon of harmony and order. By purifying the microcosm of his own being, he contributes to the purification of the macrocosm, demonstrating that the path of the magician, while seemingly focused on the self, is ultimately a work of selfless service to the whole of humanity. The Constitution of Man. Our esteemed author, having delineated the grand philosophical map of the cosmos, now turns his discerning gaze inward, applying the sublime structure of the tree of life to the microcosm of man. For it is a fundamental postulate of all esoteric science that man is an exact image, a miniature reflection of the universe. That which is perceived without is also represented within. This correspondence is the very key to the theurgic art, for in understanding the self, one comes to understand the cosmos, and in uniting with the forces of the cosmos, one comes to the true realization of the self. Mr. Regardie considers the perennial philosophical debate regarding the subjectivity or objectivity of phenomena, noting that the Qabalah leaves the question open to be answered by each individual in the light of their own spiritual experience. One may view the gods and the planes of nature as objective realities entirely external to one's own consciousness. Alternatively, one may embrace the view that these hierarchies are inherent faculties within the human soul, and that invocation is the art of awakening and unfolding these dormant powers. Ultimately, the practical work remains the same, but the latter view provides a profound psychological framework for the great work. Using the tree of life as his guide, the author describes the constitution of man in its several parts or principles. At the highest point, corresponding to Kether, the crown, is the true, self-existent spirit, the Yechida. This is the monad, the indivisible and supreme point of consciousness, the eternal center from which all the energy and force of the individual flows. This monad, however, is too abstract and spiritually remote to be considered man by itself. Its direct vehicles are the powers corresponding to Chokmah and Bina. In man, these are the Kia, or the creative will, and the Neshama, the spiritual soul whose nature is pure intuition. This supreme trinity of Yechidah, Chia, and Neshama constitutes the imperishable, unchanging man, the inner God or holy guardian angel. This is the true genius, the divine artist residing in the archetypal world of each individual's being. The more one enters into communion with this divine triad, the more one achieves the full splendor of that eternal miracle which is true manhood. The Kaya, the spiritual will, is the active, energetic power, aptly symbolized by the magical wand. The Neshama, the intuition, is passive and receptive, like the magical chalice, ever open to receive the influx from above. These three principles, like the supernal Sephiroth of the cosmos, exist beyond the abyss, reflecting themselves downward into the phenomenal universe of human consciousness. Here, corresponding to the next 6 Sephiroth from Chesed to Yesod, we find the Ruach, which is the human soul or empirical ego. The Ruach is a composite principle of reason, will, imagination, memory, and emotion. It is the complex psychological mechanism created through eons of evolution, through which the true self seeks to gain experience and come to a realization of its own divine nature. Herein lies a great psychological anomaly and the central drama of human existence. This Ruach, this instrument, usurps the power of its creator. This ever-changing flux of thoughts and emotions calls itself I, divorcing itself from its own divine Lord and setting itself up on a pedestal. In magic, it is this false empirical ego which must be offered up in sacrifice to the holy guardian angel. The author wisely clarifies that this destruction of the ego does not mean the annihilation of the principle itself. Rather, it is the false value, the illusion of its supremacy and permanence, which must be surrendered. When its egoism is rooted out, the Ruach becomes a perfect and indispensable instrument for the soul. Corresponding to the 9th Sephirah, Yesod, is the Nephesh. This is the animal soul, the vegetative and instinctual principle concerned with the mere act of living. It is a principle of both energy and plastic substance, comprising the vital life currents and the invisible astral mold, or double, upon which the physical body is built. It is the seat of the primal impulses and the automatic storehouse of memories and sensations, comparable to what modern psychology terms the subconscious. Finally, corresponding to Malkuth, is the Guf, the physical body itself. It is the kingdom, the temple, which is the seat of all the higher forces and spiritual powers of man. Mr. Regardie emphasizes that the Ruach, the rational mind by its very nature, contains a principle of self-contradiction which prevents it from grasping ultimate reality. Relying on reason alone, man can never arrive at a true realization of his own eternal nature. To know oneself as a god, one must awaken higher faculties. As Iamblichus affirmed, it is not through discursive reasoning, but through the ineffable rites of theurgy that one achieves fellowship with the gods. The supreme object of all magical ritual is therefore the building of the pyramidal apex of spiritual experience upon the tower of the intellect, which is the communion with the higher self. This is the most important step for every man, the accomplishment of which brings a new vision of life and illuminates the dark corners of existence with an incomparable splendor. The gods of the magical system. Our learned author now proceeds to a more detailed examination of that which constitutes the very heart of theurgic practice, the communion with the divine. He elucidates the concept of the gods, not as a primitive polytheism, but as a sophisticated and profound understanding of the universe. The theurgists of old, he explains, were not polytheists in the common sense of the word. Like the educated priesthood of Egypt, they recognized one supreme, omnipresent, and unknowable life, a single divine principle from which all things emanate. This one life, however, in its manifestation, refracts itself into a heterogeneous group of divine entities, cosmic intelligences, or conscious forces who become the architects and builders of the universe. These beings have been known by many names: gods, daimons, Dayan Chohans, universal essences. But the fundamental idea remains the same. They are conscious centers of force, wisdom, and intelligence who administer the cosmic plan. The theurgist seeks to enter into a close and abiding spiritual union with these deities, who are the underlying realities and the very sources of sustenance and vitality in the cosmos. The author gives particular attention to the pantheon of ancient Egypt, whose priests and magicians had closely studied these cosmic forces, recording their attributes in a rich tapestry of myth, legend, and symbol. He wisely cautions the reader against dismissing these accounts as mere childish fantasies. Each emblem, each pictograph, each myth associated with an Egyptian deity holds a high and profound significance, describing with simple eloquence the characteristics of the god. The scepter denotes sovereignty, the ankh signifies life, and the blue plume of Ma'at implies truth and uprightness. The animal masks worn by the gods are not literal representations, but are perfect symbols for their inherent natures. The hawk, poised in the heavens, represents the detached divine self. The ibis, in its meditative posture, symbolizes wisdom. Mr. Regardie then provides a systematic classification of these gods, corresponding them to the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, thus weaving together the Egyptian and Kabbalistic systems into a coherent whole. To Kether, the crown, the first emanation, he attributes Ptah, the opener, who inaugurates the cycle of manifestation, fashioning the egg of the world upon his potter's wheel. Also corresponding to this sphere is Ammon, the hidden, concealed creative power, the source of all life. To Chokmah, wisdom, the second Sephira, is assigned Thoth or Tahuti. Thoth is the personification of the divine intelligence, the heart and tongue of the Creator, the Logos who speaks the words that bring the universe into being and who directs the motions of the heavenly bodies. To Binah, understanding, the Great Mother, corresponds Isis, the great passive and reproductive power who conceives and brings forth all of creation. She is the compassionate Queen of Heaven, the protector and nourisher of all that she has birthed. To Chesed, mercy, the fourth Sephira, is attributed the goddess Ma'at, the embodiment of cosmic law, order, truth, and righteousness. Her symbol, the ostrich feather, represents that which is straight and true, and she presides over the weighing of the heart in the hall of judgment. To Geburah, might, the fifth Sephira, corresponds Horus, the god of force and fire, the avenger of his father Osiris. He is the conquering hero, represented as a hawk, who wages war against the forces of darkness and restores sight and life to the slain god. To Tifereth, beauty, the central sphere of the sun, are attributed the great Redeemer gods, the divine incarnations who suffer, die, and are reborn in glory. Osiris is the primary Egyptian example, the god-man who became king of the spiritual realm and the symbol of resurrection for all humanity. Other deities of this sphere include Dionysius, Krishna, and Mithra, all of whom represent the illuminated soul, the perfected adept, the point of equilibrium between spirit and matter. Ra, the great solar deity, is also a Tifereth correspondence, representing the divine light and life that vanquishes all darkness. To Netzach, victory, the seventh Sephira, corresponds Hathor, the Egyptian Aphrodite. She is the cosmic goddess of love, joy, and the generative fertile power of nature, the patroness of artists, dancers, and all that is beautiful. To Had, splendor, the eighth Sephira, is assigned Hermes or the jackal-headed Anubis. Anubis is the guardian, the watcher, and the guide of souls in the underworld, the one who presides over the magical rites of transition and examines the balance in the hall of judgment. To Yesod, the foundation, the ninth Sephira, is attributed the lunar goddess Bast or Pasht, who is often depicted with the head of a cat. Also corresponding here is Shu, the god of the air or space between heaven and earth, representing the vital principles and the stable foundation upon which the physical world rests. Finally, to Malkuth, the kingdom, the 10th Sephira, is assigned Seb, the god of the earth itself, whose body forms the very ground upon which we walk. Mr. Regardie concludes by stressing that a thorough study of these divine principles and their mythological representations is essential before any practical work of invocation is undertaken, for it is only through a deep understanding of the nature of the gods that the theurgist can hope to successfully establish that sacred union which is the ultimate goal of his art. The instruments of the art. Having established the divine objective of the great work, Mr. Regardie next turns his attention to the practical means by which the theurgist accomplishes his aims. He addresses the common misconception that the various instruments of the magician, the wand, cup, sword, circle, and so forth, are mere stage apparatus designed for dramatic effect or to delude the gullible. This opinion, he asserts, is wholly incorrect and unjustifiable. The magical apparatus is no more charlatanism than the complex instruments and mathematical formulae of the physicist. Both are means by which the practitioner comes to understand and interact with a specific level of reality. The author explains that the core of magical practice is the training and strengthening of the will and the imagination. The various ceremonies, vestments, perfumes, and figures are all meticulously designed for this one purpose, to employ the imagination in the education of the will. Each instrument and symbol is not an arbitrary object, but a representation of an inherent occult force in man or a principle in the universe. Their prime intention is to arouse an automatic and irresistible current of thought and imaginative power that will exalt the magician's entire being in the specific direction of the ceremony's aim. In essence, magical ritual is a sophisticated mnemonic process. Every sense and every faculty is deliberately mobilized and focused on a single point. The sigils presented to the eye, the vibrations spoken to the ear, the incenses offered to the nose. All are made to serve as reminders of the one supreme idea of the invocation. When symbol upon symbol has been impressed upon the consciousness and emotion after emotion has been roused, the supreme moment arrives when every nerve and every channel of force is strained in one overwhelming spasm of will, directed towards the attainment of a spiritual state of consciousness. The author then proceeds to describe the function of the principal magical instruments. The most fundamental of these is the magical circle. This is not merely a line drawn on the floor, it is a profound symbol with multiple layers of meaning. It represents the self-imposed limitation of the magician's work, a declaration that he is no longer a blind wanderer but is confining his labor to the attainment of a specific, willed end. It also typifies the magician's own sphere of consciousness, his personal universe, outside of which nothing can exist for him. From another perspective, the circle is the infinite Ein Sof, and the magician at its center is the point of consciousness whose duty is to expand until it becomes one with that infinity. Crucially, the circle also serves as a protective barrier. It is fortified with divine names to restrain the intrusion of hostile and extraneous forces that might otherwise be attracted to the operation and vitiate the work. Mr. Regardie refutes the criticism that this implies fear, drawing an analogy to the practical use of surgical disinfectants or sidewalks on a busy street. They are not expressions of panic, but intelligent precautions. The true magical circle is not the one painted on the floor, but the astral fortress of light built up around the magician's aura through months of daily banishing rituals. Within the circle stands the altar, the foundation of the work and the symbol of the lower, disciplined will. Upon it are arrayed the four elemental weapons, the wand, representing the element of fire and the creative will, the kaya, the cup, representing water and the receptive intuition, the neshama, the sword or dagger, representing air and the analytical power of the mind, the ruach, and the pentacle, representing earth and the physical body, the stable temple of the spirit. Each of these weapons must be constructed and consecrated with great care, so that it becomes not merely an object, but a dynamic and living symbol of the faculty it represents. The painstaking process of cutting a branch for a wand at a specific time, stripping it, and preparing it is not a superstitious rite, but an exercise that powerfully develops the will of the operator. Suspended above the altar is the ever-burning lamp, which is never extinguished. It symbolizes the undimmed radiance of the higher self, the holy guardian angel, whose knowledge and conversation is the ultimate goal of the magician's aspiration. Outside the circle is placed the triangle of art, the symbol of manifestation into which a spirit is conjured to visible appearance. The perfumes and incenses used in the rites serve a threefold purpose. They provide a material basis for a manifesting spirit, they act as a sweet-smelling sacrifice, and their powerful odors have a direct intoxicant effect on the magician's consciousness, aiding in his exaltation. In this carefully constructed environment, every object and every action is woven into a single, unified purpose: the education of the will, the exaltation of the imagination, and the ultimate attainment of union with the divine. The development of the will. The author dedicates a significant chapter to the methods by which the student may develop that most crucial of all magical faculties, the will. He asserts that the ancient sages knew the secret of how to increase this power tenfold, and that this secret has never been lost. The will is the primary factor in the production of all spiritual change, and any technique that enhances its potency is of transcendental importance to the theurgist. Mr. Regardie, drawing upon the wisdom of Eliphaz Levi, explains that the will is educated and strengthened through habit and exercise, much like the muscles of the body are developed through graduated athletics. The core of this training is a form of consciously imposed asceticism. It is essential, however, to understand the true nature of this practice. This is not the self-torturing asceticism of the fakir, which senselessly damages the physical instrument, nor is it the egoistic display of denial for the sake of public acclaim. The asceticism of which magic speaks is a matter of convenience and training, undertaken for the specific and well-defined purpose of strengthening the will and accomplishing the mystical abnegation of the false ego. It denies the cravings of the not-self in order to open the being to the light of the true will. To this end, the author outlines an extremely efficient and practical technique, one free from the moralistic pitfalls of older systems. The method involves taking a vow to refrain from a specific, habitual, and morally neutral action for a set period. One might vow, for instance, not to cross one's legs when sitting, or not to raise the left hand to the face. The advantage of choosing such an action is that it prevents the operator from making a foolish virtue out of his denial. It is not about abstaining from a bad habit, which might lead to pride, but about gaining conscious control over an automatic process. The crucial part of the discipline lies in the penalty for any violation of the oath. Whenever the practitioner forgets and performs the proscribed act, he must immediately punish himself by making a sharp cut on his forearm with a razor. This act, while causing some little pain, is not masochistic. Its purpose is to make a deep and lasting impression on the mind, engraving the lesson on the memory and setting up inhibitory currents in the brain. This discipline rapidly establishes a curious and powerful vigilance on the part of the will. The practitioner will find that an unconscious, free-flowing current of will force becomes ever-present, ready to prevent the forbidden action before it is even half completed. This practice can be extended from physical actions to speech by vowing to omit a common word like I or and from one's conversation, and eventually to thought itself by forbidding certain thoughts from entering the mind. The results of this technique are twofold. First, a tremendous potential of willpower is generated, bringing the multifarious activities of the human being under conscious control. Second, the ruach, the ego itself, which was previously so unruly, gradually learns to place itself under the command of this newly forged will. The practitioner learns to see his body and mind for what they are, servants to be used and commanded. Another powerful adjuvant for the development of the will, our author explains, is the yogic practice of pranayama, or rhythmic breathing. This practice has a threefold benefit. It stimulates the physical body and endocrine system, flooding the personality with creative energy. It establishes a unison of vibration throughout the cells of the being, creating a powerful electric current of will. And, perhaps most importantly for the beginner, the sheer tedium and difficulty of maintaining a regulated rhythm of breath for long periods is one of the most arduous tasks imaginable. To persist in it requires the exertion of the utmost willpower and the development of an adamant determination to overcome the inertia and lassitude of the body and mind. The author concludes this section by addressing the secret of success in all ceremonial magic. It is not enough to meticulously perform the outward rites. The reason so many amateurs fail is that they neglect the one essential ingredient, the inner fire. The key lies in the injunctions of the great masters: invoke often, and inflame thyself with prayer. The magician must cultivate a mantic enthusiasm, an indescribable species of excitement or frenzy that carries him completely outside of and beyond himself. It is an intoxication of the soul, a white-hot passion of creativity. This state cannot be forced by rule, but is induced through the cumulative effect of the ceremony, the invocations, the lights, the perfumes, the gestures, all contributing to a rapture that is the true precursor to the ecstasy of divine union, the barbarous names of evocation. Mr. Regardie now turns his scholarly attention to a fascinating and often misunderstood aspect of magical practice, the use of mantrams and the so-called barbarous names of evocation. He first considers the power of sound itself, a force long recognized as creative and formative. The Hindu mantram, he explains, can be understood in several ways. One theory holds that its rhythmic repetition acts like a revolving wheel in the brain, hurling off all extraneous thoughts and emptying the mind so that the mystical experience may ensue. Another view is that the specific vibration of a mantram has a purifying effect, expelling coarser elements from the body and refining the entire constitution of man. The core of the magical theory of sound, however, lies in the principle of correspondence. As Madame Blavatsky noted, sound and rhythm are closely related to the four elements, and a particular vibration in the air is sure to awaken corresponding powers in the invisible world. The vibration of a divine name, therefore, is a potent key that opens the door of communication between mortals and immortals. The magician, through dedicated practice, can learn to vibrate a single word so powerfully that it makes his entire body tremble. And this vibration, projected into the astral light, has the power to mold that plastic substance and compel the attention of the intelligences who correspond to that specific sound. This leads to the subject of the barbarous names, those seemingly incomprehensible words that appear in so many ancient rituals. The Chaldean oracles wisely counsel that these should never be changed, for they are names divine having in the sacred rites a power ineffable. The author clarifies that barbarous originally meant simply native, referring to the dialects of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Assyrians. Iamblichus explains that these names were delivered by the first priests in a language peculiar and adapted to the gods, and that they possess a great emphasis and conciseness, free from the ambiguity of ordinary speech. Experience confirms that the most powerful invocations are often those containing words from ancient or forgotten tongues, or even what appears to be a meaningless jargon. Their virtue lies in their vibrant, sonorous quality, which has a direct and exhilarating effect on the consciousness of the magician when they are properly intoned. The author notes that this phenomenon is not unique to magic. Poets and even children are often singularly affected by the rhythmic music of strange and powerful-sounding names. The names themselves may convey nothing to the rational intellect, but their witchery enters the imagination and arouses a peculiar frenzy or excitation. However, the true theurgist does not permit meaningless words to enter his sphere. While their sound is potent, their inner significance must also be understood. Every barbarous word must be carefully studied and analyzed with the tools of the Qabalah, so that its hidden meaning may penetrate the subconscious and assist in the ceremony. Mr. Regardie provides several examples of this analysis. He takes the word asalonoi and, using the principles of the magical alphabet, reveals it to be a complete epitome of an invocation to the holy guardian angel. He similarly deciphers Falartha'au as a complex symbol involving the creative phallus, the sun god Ra, and the leonine serpent of life. For the practical employment of these names in ritual, the author outlines a technique wherein the magician projects his consciousness along an imagined shaft of light that corresponds to the vibrated word. With each successive word, the shaft is imagined to grow longer and higher, until the consciousness is carried to a state of supreme intoxication and awe, a fitting prelude to magical ecstasy. Finally, Mr. Regardie considers other subsidiary accompaniments to ceremonial work, such as music and the dance. Music, he notes, is a complicated matter, as its appreciation varies, but the monotonous, rhythmic beat of a tom-tom can be useful for stilling the mind. The dance is of particular interest, as it is the very incarnation of rhythm, the essential element of life. He cites the dance of the Islamic dervishes, who use a rapid whirling motion to induce a state of ecstatic unconsciousness. For the modern theurgist, the principal object of the dance is to induce a state of physical exhaustion and cessation of thought, creating a receptive vacuum into which the invoked divine presence may incarnate. The circumambulation of the circle is a more common form of this motion, a marvelous method of acquiring potential and arousing the necessary force and enthusiasm for the work. The body of light. In a chapter of profound practical significance, our author delves into the most fundamental task of the magician, the formulation and projection of the subtle vehicle known as the body of light. This practice is the key to exploring the invisible realms and is the primary means by which the theurgist transcends the limitations of the physical world. Mr. Regardie begins by reaffirming the dual nature of the astral light. There is the lower, lunar aspect, the realm of the quixotic shells and deceiving phantoms, and there is the superior, solar plane, the realm ever splendid, wherein abide the true spiritual images and intimations. The first task of the magician is to rise beyond the astral serpent of the lower world into this higher realm. While the ultimate method for this is the invocation of the holy guardian angel, a preliminary and essential practice is the conscious projection of the soul in its refined vehicle. The author explains that corresponding to the astral plane in the cosmos, there is a similar principle within man. The lower, lunar phase corresponds to the nephesh, the animal soul, and its substantive vehicle, the astral body or vital double. While the development of this body is a branch of magic, it is not the focus of the higher theurgy. Pertaining to the sphere of Tifereth, the solar center of the Ruach is a higher vehicle, a mental or thought body, composed of the substance of the divine astral. This is the Mayavi Rupa of the Hindus, which in theurgy is named the body of light. To be able to consciously separate and project this body of light from the physical frame is a mark of true adeptship. It is the magical fulfillment of the Hermetic injunction, "Thou shalt separate the fine from the gross," acting with great sagacity. The ability to succeed in this work depends entirely on the power of the trained imagination, which is the magical lever for the projection. The technique, as Mr. Regardie lucidly describes it, begins with the magician seating himself quietly and imagining an exact duplicate of his own body standing before him. This image should be formulated with the utmost vividness, clothed in the magical robe and holding the appropriate weapon. The next and most difficult step is the transference of consciousness into this imagined form. The practitioner must will himself to be within the thought body. A powerful method for accomplishing this is to cause the imagined body to perform a ritual, such as the banishing ritual of the pentagram. By persisting in this, the magician will suddenly find that he is no longer observing the ritual from without, but is himself performing it from within the body of light. Once this projection is accomplished, the real work of educating the subtle body begins. It must be trained to move and to see on the astral plane, where it can travel with the lightning rapidity of thought. The first task is to perceive the physical room from this new perspective, observing one's own vacated physical body. This practice, when successful, leads to a profound philosophical realization. The soul is distinct from the body and can function independently of it. One knows, by direct observation, that one is not the physical form. This is the first great step towards conquering the fear of death. The body of light must then be used to investigate the astral world, to explore its varied landscapes, and to test the reality of its symbols. One may use the tattva symbols or the signs of the tarot as gateways into specific regions of that plane, observing the scenery and conversing with the beings encountered there to gain a new and deeper knowledge of their significance. The author wisely includes a method for testing the accuracy of these visions. Upon returning to the physical body, the experience must be meticulously recorded in a magical diary and then checked against the established tables of correspondences. If a vision of a mercurial nature contains elements corresponding to Mars or Saturn, the student knows that something has gone awry and the vision must be repeated and corrected. Finally, Mr. Regardie provides several crucial precautions. Before projecting, a thorough banishing must be performed to protect the vacated physical body from obsession by wandering entities. The body of light must be continually refined and purified through practices like the Eucharist and the Assumption of God forms, transforming it from a dark, lunar vehicle into a brilliant, solar organism capable of ascending to the highest spiritual planes. When confronted by armed guardians at the gates of the astral pylons, the theurgist must understand this as a sign that he is not yet worthy to pass. He must then redouble his efforts at purification until his body of light, his wedding garment, is sufficiently radiant to grant him entry. With this perfected instrument, the magician may then rise on the plains from Sephira to Sephira, up the great ladder of the tree of life, until he is ultimately assimilated into the ineffable glory of the crown. The Assumption of the God forms. We now arrive at what our author describes as one of the most potent adjuncts to invocation and an essential key to all successful magical work, the astral assumption of the God form. This is a technique of the highest antiquity and profoundest efficacy. Mr. Regardie cites the French Egyptologist François Chabas, who stated that the most powerful formula known to the priests of ancient Egypt was the imaginative identification of the ritualist with the divinity being invoked. The great Neoplatonist Iamblichus confirms this, writing that the priest who invokes commands power because, through the use of arcane symbols, he becomes invested with the sacred forms of the gods. The principle is rooted in the plastic and creative nature of the astral light and the power of the trained imagination. The conventional, pictorial representations of the gods, particularly those of the Egyptian pantheon, are not mere artistic fancies. They are marvelously recondite systems of symbolism, perfect talismans that epitomize the nature and powers of a specific cosmic intelligence. The headdress, the colors, the weapons, and the posture of a god form are all clues to its inherent character and function in the universal economy. The technique, as the author clearly outlines it, involves several distinct stages. First, the magician must engage in a thorough study of the god he wishes to assume. He must analyze the legends and myths associated with the deity to gain an intellectual and intuitive understanding of its nature. Unintelligent pursuit of any magical technique is a great danger. The student must comprehend the force he desires to invoke. With this knowledge as a foundation, he must then proceed to the creative work of the imagination. He must endeavor to build up before his mind's eye a perfect and complete image of the god, gigantic and resplendent, glowing with an inner spiritual light. This is an arduous task, demanding patience and devotion, and must be practiced day after day until the form stands out boldly and clearly in the astral vision. The next step is the assumption of this form. The magician must imagine this astral effigy of the god enveloping his own form, enshrouding him, until his own body of light is transmuted and made to coincide perfectly with the body of the god. This process should be accompanied by the recitation of a powerful and lyrical invocation to the god, a paean of praise that delineates his qualities and powers, further exciting the imagination and inflaming the soul with devotion. The work is not complete until the magician actually feels the superb influx of divine power. He must know, through an unshakable intuition, that the identification has been accomplished and that he has become a living vessel for the divine consciousness. The god will then seek his dwelling place within the heart of his devotee, and the child of earth is transformed into a veritable son of the god. The results of this practice are profound. As Imblicus notes, the presence of the gods imparts health to the body, virtue to the soul, and purity to the intellect, elevating everything in us to its proper principle. The magician, having united himself with the greatness of the gods, finds that latent spiritual faculties begin to unfold within him. The world, which was once perceived as gross and mundane, becomes divested of its commonplace nature and takes on an exquisite and alluring beauty. The consciousness expands, and the memory of past spiritual experiences awakens, illuminating the mind and pulsing anew in the heart. He becomes, like the sun god Ra himself, a source of light and spiritual nourishment to all with whom he comes in contact, his help and blessing descending upon the great and the small, the high and the lowly alike. Through this holy art, the magician becomes an integral part of the universal creation, a conscious co-worker with the divine forces that sustain the cosmos. The invocation of the holy guardian angel. We now approach the very summit of the magical path, the central and most sacred operation of the theurgic art. Our author makes it unequivocally clear that all other works, all other aspirations, must ultimately be subordinated to this one supreme goal, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. This is the one perfect ritual, the mystical marriage of the human soul with its own divine counterpart, the Algoides or higher self. Mr. Regardie begins by examining the concept of purity, a prerequisite insisted upon by all magical authorities. He wisely steers clear of conventional ethics and morals, explaining that magical purity is not about adherence to a social code. Rather, it is about being one-pointed. Just as pure milk is that to which nothing extraneous has been added, so a pure life for the magician is one in which the sum total of all thoughts, emotions, and actions is concentrated upon and dedicated to the single-minded pursuit of the great work. Every act of daily life must be transfigured into a sacrament, a symbol of the one supreme aspiration. This one aspiration, this ideal treasured above all others, is the recovery of the knowledge of the holy guardian angel. The procedure laid down by the ancients and echoed by Iamblichus is that the soul must first unite with its own personal daimon or angel, and only then, under the guidance of this divine genius, should it proceed to supplicate the universal gods. Any subsidiary magical operation undertaken before this primary attainment must have for its sole motive the removal of some obstacle that hinders the successful performance of the major ritual. The author explains that the manifestation of the angel is not identical for all people. The outcome of the mystical union is shaped by the nature of the individual's aspiration. As the Upanishads teach, if one approaches the self as power, one becomes power. If one approaches it as wisdom, one becomes wise. The genius that is born from this union may be artistic, poetic, scientific, or it may manifest as a quiet, humble life made into a sublime work of art, a secret vessel of the angel's light, blessing all with whom it comes in contact. To achieve this supreme end, Mr. Regardie presents a summary of what he considers to be the finest technical system available, a method of unparalleled simplicity and effectiveness, the operation described in the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. He praises this extraordinary work for its coherence and its freedom from the fantastic and often puerile demands of other grimoires. Its method is direct, and its aim is sublime. The Abramelin operation requires a period of 6 lunar months, during which the aspirant must lead a life of tranquility and increasing devotion. The work should ideally begin around the vernal equinox, a time of natural rebirth and upward growth, and conclude around the autumnal equinox. The operator must secure a place of solitude, an oratory, with a window opening onto a terrace covered with fine river sand. This consecrated space, through months of prayer and suffumigation, becomes its own magical circle, a sanctuary sealed by sanctity itself. The 6-month period is divided into 3 stages of 2 months each. During the first period, the operator must rise before sunrise and, after purifying himself, enter the oratory to pray and invoke his angel. He must confess his sins, not out of a sense of guilt, but to produce the tranquility of mind necessary for the work. His life must be one of moderation and cleanliness, free from anger and vanity, with all his actions dedicated to the one goal. In the second period, the invocations are to be lengthened and made more ardent and fiery. The asceticism becomes slightly more severe and the retreat from the world more complete. It is during this time that the magician will likely enter the dark night of the soul, a state of spiritual dryness where all seems lost and the mind is assailed by 1,000 temptations to abandon the work. The only remedy is to persevere, to adhere grimly to the letter of the initial oath. In the third and final period, the invocations become still more intense. The operator is now to pray at morning and at noon, having left all worldly business aside. His whole being is focused, aimed like an arrow at the single target. Then, on the morning after the 6 months are complete, clad in a robe of mourning, he enters the oratory for the final time. Prostrating himself, he is to enflame himself in praying, and then he will behold an extraordinary and supernatural splendor, the ineffable presence of his holy guardian angel, who will appear to him in unequaled beauty and converse with him in words of unimaginable sweetness and affection. This is the consummation of the great work, the attainment that marks the true beginning of the career of an adept, the rationale of evocation. Following the sublime attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, the Abramelin system, as Mr. Regardie explains, proceeds to the evocation of the spirits and demons. At first glance, this may appear to be an anticlimax, a descent from the holy communion of the invocation to the seemingly lesser work of commanding spirits. The author, however, provides a profound rationale for this procedure, demonstrating that it is not a degradation but a necessary and logical next step in the magician's development. The core reason for these evocations is the need for the newly crowned adept to bring the entirety of his own being, and by extension, the universe, under the dominion of his now divinely informed will. The spirits described in grimoires like the Goetia are not to be understood merely as external entities, but as personifications of the various hidden facets and subconscious powers within the magician's own psyche. As long as these forces remain unconscious, unnamed, unformed, and uncontrolled in the deep abysses of the mind, they cannot be properly examined, developed, or utilized. The author draws a powerful analogy to modern psychological research. Just as a psychoanalyst must bring a patient's hidden complex or neurosis into the light of consciousness to define and dispel it, so too must the magician call forth the hidden parts of his own soul. The process of evocation gives these powers a tangible form and a name, conjuring them into the triangle of manifestation where they can be confronted, understood, and commanded by the magician, who stands as a god to them from within his sacred circle. This act transforms the inchoate horde of undisciplined thoughts and passions into an orderly hierarchy of servants, placing their knowledge and energy at the disposal of the true will. This explains why, for some, it may be necessary to perform certain evocations even before the supreme attainment. If the ruach, the mind complex which is to be offered in sacrifice to the angel, is flawed or deficient, it must first be perfected. One may need to evoke a spirit who teaches the arts of logic and ethics to repair a faulty memory, or another to stimulate a stultified emotional faculty. This is akin to preparing the bride for her mystical marriage with the king's son. By this method, the magician builds a solid, four-square foundation for his spiritual pyramid, ensuring that when the illumination of the angel descends, it will have a sound and balanced vessel to inhabit, preventing the danger of the experience overthrowing the balance of the mind. Mr. Regardie then offers a summary of the most famous works of ceremonial evocation. He discusses the Key of Solomon the King, a work that served as a central storehouse for medieval Kabbalistic magic and a primary source for Eliphaz Levi. This system is highly objective, based on the postulate that spiritual intelligences corresponding to the 7 planets exist independently and can be compelled to appear through the use of the correct invocations, pentacles, and correspondences of day and hour. He also examines the Goetia, or the Lesser Key of Solomon, the King, which describes 72 hierarchies of spirits who were said to have been bound by King Solomon. These spirits, classified as kings, dukes, princes, and so on, correspond to the planets and elements, and, when evoked, can confer specific knowledge or faculties upon the operator. The author refutes the common dismissal of this work as mere black magic, explaining that its purpose is the disciplined exploration and control of the hidden parts of the self. Finally, he mentions the lesser-known Book of the Angel Ratziel, a Hebrew work that, while containing much that is crude, also attempts to describe the organization of the heavens and the hierarchies of angels. He notes that the amateur visions often found in such texts are frequently confused because the seer has failed to perform a proper banishing, allowing the sphere of perception to be invaded by extraneous entities. Throughout this discussion, Mr. Regardie emphasizes the essential unity of the magical and yogic paths. He draws a direct correspondence between the invocation of the gods and the awakening of the chakras, or astral nerve centers, in the yogic system. To invoke Thoth, the god of wisdom, is tantamount to stimulating the Ajna chakra, the organ of spiritual vision. To unite with Osiris is to raise the Kundalini to the Sahasrara chakra at the crown of the head. Both systems use will and imagination to achieve their results, and both issue the same solemn warning: woe to him who works out of a mere lust for power. Any powers that are gained must be immediately dedicated to the service of the holy guardian angel, for the true goal is not the acquisition of psychic abilities, but the infinite expansion of consciousness and the discovery of the real center of life, the grandeur of the dramatic ritual. In a chapter that speaks to the profound aesthetic and communal aspects of the great work, our author elucidates the nature and purpose of the dramatic ritual. This is a form of group ceremony wherein a number of individuals participate together, each contributing their will force and energy to the creation of a single spiritual manifestation. Mr. Regardie explains that nearly all the great mysteries of ancient times took this form, as did the initiation rites of the secret fraternities of every age. Evidence for such rituals can be found in the traditions of Tibet, India, and most notably, ancient Egypt. The fundamental principle of the dramatic ritual is the same as that of all high magic, the invocation of a god. In this form, however, the invocation proceeds by means of an aesthetic appeal to the imagination, dramatizing the life, death, and resurrection of a great spiritual exemplar, a god-man such as Osiris, Dionysius, or the symbolic figure of Christian Rosenkreuz. This is the principle of commemoration. By reenacting the sacred history of one who has successfully trod the path of attainment, the participants place themselves in a state of profound magical sympathy with that being, creating a powerful current that exalts their own souls towards the same goal. The magician, in the context of the drama, imagines himself to be the god, and the unfolding ritual serves to make that identification more and more complete. The author cites several preeminent examples of this form of magic. The annual Passion Play of Osiris at Abydos was a complex dramatic ritual that reenacted the god's betrayal, death, and eventual triumph over his enemies, culminating in his glorious resurrection. Similarly, the Catholic Mass celebrates the life, sacrifice, and resurrection of the Christian Savior. The third degree of Freemasonry dramatizes the slaying and raising of the master builder, Hiram Abiff, and the Adeptus Minor ritual of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn rehearses the mystical history of the order's legendary founder, Christian Rosenkreuz, culminating in his symbolic resurrection from the tomb, at which point the chief adept proclaims his identity with the risen master, and, by extension, with Osiris, Ammon, and the universal principle of life triumphant over death. Mr. Regardie also describes the general form of an initiatory ritual. The candidate, or neophyte, is typically hoodwinked, bound with a cord, and clothed in a black gown, symbolizing his state of darkness, his bondage to the elements, and his existence in the world of death. He is led in circumambulation around the temple and challenged at the stations of the cardinal points by the officers, who represent the guardian gods. He must prove his worthiness to pass by declaring his aspiration and knowledge of the guardian's secret names. If the officers of the temple are themselves initiated magicians, capable of assuming the god forms of the deities they represent, the ceremony becomes a rite of tremendous power, infusing the neophyte's very soul with the divine forces that are invoked. The author stresses, however, that no amount of ceremonial initiation can substitute for the personal, practical work of the individual. The ritual may serve as a powerful consecration and a preparation, but the real work must be done by the student himself. He must cultivate, above all else, the virtues of patience and perseverance. The path of magic is an arduous one. The student will be assailed by fears, doubts, and the temptations of the world. The entire host of the invisible realms will seem to conspire against him. In the face of all this, there is only one course: to adhere steadfastly to the magical vow, to work as though omnipotence were his and eternity were at his disposal. He concludes with a beautiful and profound allegory from a work by Aleister Crowley, telling of an ibis that wished to become a royal Uraeus serpent. The serpent tells the ibis that it must live for millions of generations to perhaps attain a single drop of the sacred poison. But the ibis, hearing this, immediately lays aside its ibis ways and becomes as a serpent in its own heart, and in a short time the transformation is accomplished. It is this sublime spirit of indomitable will and determination, this unwavering aspiration, that constitutes the true power of the magician. With this spirit, though the goal may seem countless ages away, the golden flower of the soul may blossom far more speedily than one might dare to hope. The work is to transmute the base metal of the world into the pure gold of the spirit, and this constant alchemical operation is the true redemption of the world. A consideration of spiritualism and black magic. In this penultimate section of his work, our author addresses several peripheral yet important topics, drawing clear lines of distinction between the high art of theurgy and other, lesser practices with which it is often confused. He first turns his attention to the relationship between magic and modern spiritualism. He declares that although some may think otherwise, there is no actual connection between the phenomena of the two systems. A great and impassable gulf separates them, a gulf defined by a single principle, the will. The phenomena of the spiritualistic seance, he explains, are passive. The medium is an uncontrolled and negative instrument, unable to command, modify, or even fix the time of the manifestations that occur through her. The magician, in stark contrast, does nothing without the conscious and deliberate exercise of his will. Even the highest state of invocation, in which the ego is surrendered to the embrace of the divine, is an abdication undertaken by a conscious and willed determination. To understand the nature of spiritualistic communications, Mr. Regardie returns to the Kabbalistic model of the human constitution and the process of death. After the physical body dies, the soul, still enclosed in its subtler sheaths, ascends through the planes of the astral light. In this process, the nephesh, the vehicle of the lower passions and instincts, is sloughed off. This astral corpse, or klippa, remains for a time on the lower astral plane, where it slowly disintegrates. It is these decaying shells, animated by the psychic energy of the medium and the sitters, with which spiritualism is chiefly concerned. Any intelligence they display is merely a reflection, an echo of the thoughts and memories that were impressed upon the astral substance during the person's life. This is why the communications are so often trivial and incoherent. The practice is a deteriorating one for the medium, as it opens her to obsession by these low-grade entities. The author explains that a sincere medium could, however, utilize the magical technique to great advantage. By employing protective banishings and consciously invoking a specific divine force through the assumption of a god form, she could close the door to the astral dross and open herself instead to genuine spiritual intelligences, transforming a dangerous and passive obsession into a controlled and elevating inspiration. Mr. Regardie then briefly touches upon other branches of the lesser magic, such as operations for material gain, works of fascination, and the control of the tattvic currents for physical refreshment. He cautions that these practices, while not necessarily black, border closely upon it and are of little use to the aspirant who seeks the magic of light. True black magic, he states, is almost entirely a matter of the operator's motive. It is the use of magical power to deprive another of their free will or to cause harm. He dismisses with contempt the lurid and fantastic descriptions of black rites found in the works of writers like Eliphaz Levi, recognizing them as the product of an exuberant imagination rather than a reflection of actual practice. The true abomination is the selfish desire for power or the insane vanity that leads to practices like necromancy, which disturbs the sacred rest of the dead. The author concludes the chapter with a final set of instructions regarding the technique of astral traveling. He reiterates that the theurgist must thoroughly investigate the astral plane but must never lose sight of his ultimate goal, which is to transcend it. He must learn to distinguish between the deceptive elementary spirits and the true spiritual intelligences by testing them with a banishing symbol like the pentagram or the rose cross. A being that shrinks from the symbol is of the lower order and must be commanded, while one that grows in splendor is a celestial being to be revered. If he finds his way barred by an angelic guardian at a celestial pylon, he must recognize this as a sign of his own unworthiness and redouble his efforts at purifying and refining his body of light. This is accomplished through the frequent performance of banishings, the assumption of purifying God forms like that of Harpocrates, the babe on the lotus, and the regular celebration of the Eucharist, which infuses the soul with the very substance of the divine. By these means, the theurgist forges a glittering solar vehicle, a worthy wedding garment in which he may ascend the paths of the tree of life and conquer death itself, knowing with an unshakable certainty the immortality of his own divine soul. The secret operation of the Holy Ghost. In his penultimate chapter, our author approaches a subject of such profound and potent significance that he deems it necessary to depart from his usual clarity and veil his instruction in the eloquent symbolism of the alchemists. He is about to describe a secret formula of practical magic, a unique technique known as the Mass of the Holy Ghost. This operation, he explains, is the very quintessence and synthesis of all theurgic procedure, encompassing within itself the magic of talismans, the formula of the Holy Grail, the mystery of the Eucharist, and the arcana of alchemy. The philosophical key to this Mass is the formula of the Tetragrammaton, EHBH. The Yod, the Father, is here called the Red Lion. The first, the Mother, is the White Eagle. These are two great cosmic principles, two ever-flowing streams of life and light. The instruments corresponding to them are the athanor, or alchemical furnace, the Yod, and the cucurbite, or crystalline vessel, the He. The substances used in the operation are the offspring of these two principles. From the Red Lion comes the serpent, or the blood. This corresponds to the vow of the sacred name. From the White Eagle come the tears, or the gluten. This corresponds to the final He. The athanor is the generator of the serpent, and the cucurbite is the vessel which contains the gluten. The operation itself consists of several phases. Through the application of spiritual fire and willed intent, the serpent is made to ascend from the athanor and enter the cucurbite, which serves as the retort. This is the alchemical marriage. The mingling of the serpent and the gluten results in the chemical corruption, or the solve, of the serpent in the menstruum of the gluten. But from this death and corruption, a new and glorified being arises, the resplendent phoenix, the stone of the philosophers, the pure gold of the spirit. This is the coagula. This newly created substance is the elixir of life, the dew of immortality, the amrita of the gods. This elixir can then be used in one of two ways. It can be consumed by the magician in a supreme act of Eucharist, causing the invoked spiritual force to incarnate directly within his being. Or it can be used to anoint and consecrate a talisman, binding into that physical object a living and dynamic spiritual force for the accomplishment of a specific external effect. Mr. Regardie stresses that this method, while seemingly different from ordinary ceremonial work, can and should be used in conjunction with it. As the alchemical process unfolds, an enthusiastic invocation should be recited, its rhythm and power helping to formulate and vivify the magical forces at play. When performed within a consecrated circle preceded by a thorough banishing and accompanied by the assumption of the appropriate God form, this Mass becomes an engine of incomparable power, capable of opening the very gates of heaven. The supreme power that drives this technique is love, a force held in leash and directed by the disciplined will. The operation is one of creation and union, not destruction. The sword has no place here. The great danger of the work lies in its inherent delight. The magician may become so entranced by the joy of the technical performance that he loses sight of the spiritual end, and the work degenerates. A powerful and detached will and a mind trained in unwavering concentration are therefore absolute essentials. The author concludes that this Mass is the most direct and potent of all magical methods. It is especially suited for works that have as their aim the transformation of the magician's own consciousness, the development of the will, the enhancement of the imagination, and the invocation of the holy guardian angel and the gods to indwell the sacred temple of the body. It is the ultimate expression of the alchemical art, transmuting the base elements of the self into the imperishable gold of the spirit. An enquiry into ritual. In his final and most instructive chapter, the author provides a practical summation of the art of ritual construction, presenting a series of exemplary invocations drawn from a wide range of sacred traditions. He explains that a complete ceremonial operation is a composite structure comprised of as many as 8 distinct phases or cycles. The ceremony properly begins after all the preliminary preparations of the temple and instruments are complete, with a thorough banishing to purify the sphere of working. This is typically followed by a general invocation or oration to the Lord of the universe. an anthem designed to elevate the mind of the magician and draw down the divine blessing upon the work. Mr. Regardie provides several beautiful examples of such prayers, including one from the Rosicrucian tradition, an orison from Abramelin the Mage, and a sublime poetic invocation by Aleister Crowley. The precise work of the ceremony then follows. This involves a specific invocation of the god who governs the operation, an appeal to the archangel of the corresponding sphere, and a powerful conjuration of the particular spirit or intelligence whose aid is sought. When the spirit manifests in the triangle of art, it is greeted with a formal welcome, and incense is burned both as an offering and to provide it with a material basis for its appearance. The author presents a rich collection of these more specific rituals. He includes the powerful Bornless Invocation from a Greco-Egyptian magical papyrus, a text of tremendous antiquity and force, filled with sonorous and potent barbarous names. He offers a magnificent invocation to the Egyptian god Thoth, weaving together phrases from the Book of the Dead and other priestly texts into a coherent and ecstatic whole. He also reproduces a beautiful and dignified hymn to the sun, composed by the great Neoplatonist Proclus. From the Goetia, he quotes the second conjuration, a classic example of a ritual of evocation that compels a spirit to appear through the commemoration of the mighty acts performed by the patriarchs and prophets of old with the aid of the divine names. He contrasts this with a similar evocation from the Grimoire of Honorius, which uses an appeal to the saints and martyrs of the Christian faith to achieve its end. From the Key of Solomon the King, he provides a conjuration that works systematically through the powers of the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. Finally, after the work with the spirit is complete, the ceremony concludes with 2 final steps. The magician formally recites the license to depart, releasing the spirit from its manifestation and allowing it to return peacefully to its own abode. Following this, another complete banishing ritual is performed to perfectly close the ceremony and seal the magical sphere. Throughout this chapter, Mr. Regardie provides the student with a veritable treasury of theurgic literature. He demonstrates, through these carefully chosen examples, the universal principles that underlie all effective ritual. The language must be exalting, the symbols must be understood, and the entire ceremony must be focused with an unwavering will and an inflamed imagination upon the single, sacred purpose of the operation. By studying these forms, the sincere student can learn not only to perform the rituals of the past, but also to compose his own, adapting the timeless principles of the art to his own individual needs and his own unique aspiration for the light. A concluding reflection. As we draw this summary to a close, we are left with a profound appreciation for the monumental task accomplished by Israel Regardie in his masterwork, The Tree of Life. In a single volume, he succeeded in rescuing the divine theurgy from centuries of calumny and confusion, presenting it not as a dark and superstitious art, but as a noble and scientific method for the attainment of the highest spiritual ends. He has provided a clear and intelligible pathway through the vast and often trackless wilderness of occultism, a tree of life whose branches are laden with the rich fruit of wisdom and whose roots are planted firmly in the deepest soil of the human soul. The central thesis of the work is that magic is a practical, experimental science of consciousness. Its ultimate aim is the union of the individual soul with its divine source, a state of being that the author, following the traditions of the masters, calls the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. All the varied techniques of the art, the development of the will and imagination, the assumption of God forms, the vibration of divine names, the journeying in the body of light, and the performance of intricate rituals, are but means to this one supreme end. Mr. Regardie's great achievement was to synthesize the disparate elements of the Western esoteric tradition into a single, coherent system, using the Kabbalistic Tree of Life as his unifying framework. He demonstrated the profound harmony between the mystical philosophy of the Hebrews and the practical theurgy of the ancient Egyptians, and he showed how these ancient paths converge with the psychological insights of our own age. His insistence that the aspiring magician first undertake a course of self-analysis to purify the vessel of the personality is a mark of his profound wisdom and his genuine concern for the well-being of the student. He has drawn back the veil on the true meaning of the magical instruments, the circle, the talismans, and the barbarous names, revealing them not as the trappings of sorcery, but as powerful tools for focusing the mind and exalting the imagination. He has clarified the relationship between magic and yoga, showing them to be twin paths up the same mountain of reality. He has given us a rational and psychologically sound basis for understanding the phenomena of invocation and evocation, translating the seemingly archaic language of spirits and demons into a modern understanding of the hidden forces of the human psyche. Above all, the Tree of Life is a call to action. It is an invitation to embark upon the greatest of all adventures, the exploration of the inner universe and the discovery of the true self. The author does not promise an easy path. He speaks of the necessity for unwavering discipline, unflagging perseverance, and an indomitable will that can withstand the trials of the dark night of the soul. Yet he also speaks, with the authority of one who knows, of the incomparable reward that awaits at the end of the journey, an ecstasy that transcends all earthly joy, an illumination that turns the lead of our mortal nature into the gold of the spirit, and an abiding peace that is the fruit of union with the eternal. It is a work that not only informs the intellect, but also inflames the heart with a burning aspiration for the heights, and for this, its author deserves the undying gratitude of all who seek for the light. Thank you for delving into the Tree of Life with occult mysticism. Share your insights below and join our community. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more magical wisdom. Until next time, keep exploring the arcane.